Hello, my name is Kai, and today we're going to be answering the question, what if Liverpool didn't play with a striker next season? Now, this is separate from if Liverpool were to play like PSG, because in that scenario you would maybe want someone like Morgan Rogers as your striker. Instead, I'm looking to mirror what we did in the City game, playing with two false nines or two tens in the middle, with two wingers on both the left and the right. In that game, we had Luis Diaz and Mo Salah. But instead of me just explaining it, I'm actually going to show you. But before we get into it, it would be incredible if you guys could like the video and subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Thank you for 1,000 subscribers. That's insane that I've reached it this quickly. But anyway, alright, so here is the City game where Liverpool played with Curtis Jones and Dominic Szoboszlai in the two central 10/double false 9 formation. Here we can see that we have two wingers who are very high up. We have our two tens, and we have our two players in the pivot. These four players effectively form a box in midfield. This is actually a really good pressing structure because it maintains what we normally do where we have a 4-2-4, except instead of having a 4-2-4 that looks like this with your striker and your central attacking midfielder, your 10, you instead have it look more like what we see here, like this. This is kind of beneficial because it presses people against the wings and kind of forces them centrally, which might be easier for someone like Curtis Jones to close down. But let's look at the next panel. Here we can see that Nathan Ake tries to get the ball out to Josko Gvardiol, and it looks like he's bypassed Mo Salah, but Szoboszlai is coming in. He ends up pressing him to try to win the ball, and he succeeds in winning the ball and distributes the ball to Curtis because, again, in this position, since you had two players who are dropped back and the two wingers are high, centrally you get a player like Curtis who can pick up the ball and then potentially drive. And we see Curtis get on the end of the ball. He has Luis Diaz in space. He doesn't end up really making the pass because there's a center back off screen, but he ends up getting the ball back to Mo, who's able to get the ball to Dom, who can generate a pretty decent attacking opportunity. The benefit of the double false 9 is that it's very fluid, but it's also very stable in midfield. It's very good at actually winning the ball back and retaining it, which, depending on the type of team that we're trying to be, would introduce even more control into both us in possession and out of possession. Let's look at another panel. In this situation, Ibrahima Konate is on the ball, and he's looking to pass it out. He ends up making this really straight pass right to Dominic Szoboszlai, who, again, we have this situation. We have four players with these two in the central 10s positions. So you could imagine instead of Curtis here, it would be Florian Wirtz. And the ball's going to come to Dom, who can then offload it to someone like Mo, or in theory could pass it to one of the pivot players if they moved out a little bit. Ends up getting the ball to Dom, who passes it to Mo. Mo then gets the ball and looks to kind of pass it back into midfield. He succeeds by getting the ball to Ryan. Ryan's able to get the ball to Mac because, again, once Ryan receives the ball, he's got Mac in space. Mac ends up receiving the ball, and he has so many options. He could go to someone like Andrew Robertson, who's kind of inverting into this lane in midfield, something that we're going to see Kirkus do a lot next season. He has Lucho, who he could play a long ball to if he wanted to, or he could pass it back to either Ibu or Trent. In our team, you would expect someone like Frimpong to maybe be up here instead of where Trent is, but then you'd probably expect the pivot to be further back, Mo to be more inside. You kind of get what I've already talked about in build-up. He ends up choosing Lucho because it's the most progressive option that Mac could make, and then Lucho, because of the amount of space that he has, is just able to drive, and he gets into a really good attacking opportunity where the left back's inverted and is going beyond him. He has one of his 10s. This is Curtis. You could imagine this is Flo. He has another in Dom, and he has Mo on rushing. You could even imagine scenarios where Frimpong is in this position and Mo is closer infield, even Dom being closer infield, with the pivot being more static and dropped back. So you probably wouldn't even see someone like Mac on screen, for example, next season if we were to do this. Again, it could generate very good scoring opportunities. Once again, we have Ibu on the ball. This is in possession. Here you can kind of see the somewhat clear double pivot, but you once again get this box. You get Mo wide on the right, Lucho's off screen, wide on the left. You have your two fullbacks narrow but really close together. We could see configurations like this next season Again, it's more likely that our wingers would be a little closer or that the shape would look a little different, but the general gist is that you're noticing this very stable box in midfield. We move a panel and we can see that Ibu continued to push, and now it's essentially another straight pass to someone like Dom, because once again, because we have 2 false 9s / 2 central 10s, one of them can drop in while the other kind of hangs forward as a 9. It allows us to be really fluid, and it's very difficult to predict what we're going to do. And of course, you sacrifice having an out-and-out finisher. In this scenario, instead of actually going to Dom, Ibu found this pass once again to the wide man, this time being Lucho, because of how narrow you effectively have to play, because you have these two, because of how high they are, they're essentially playing like strikers, that they drag in the right fullback, in this case, the right back. So it gives Lucho a lot of empty space once again, which gives him the ability to cross if he wants to into either of the 10s. McAllister's on rushing. Again, I would probably imagine the configuration next season more so to be like, this is either Dom or Wirtz, this is either Dom or Wirtz, this would be Salah, and this would be Frimpong. And this would still be Kirkes. That's what I'd imagine it more so looking like next season. So what was the point of me showing you this? Well, what you could see from how Diaz received the ball when we were playing in that City game, the winger that we would have to sign for this position would need to be quick, very good in one-on-ones, and a great passer / wide playmaker. That's a very difficult skill set, and it's going to be hard to find a player that matches all of them. So we're going to try to get as close as we can, which is why we're now going to look at some sensible transfers. So let's take a look at the options. The first one, I'm suggesting this is because I talked about him in the Sensible Transfers video, is Malik Fofana. Now, he's naturally left-footed. Ideally, you want someone who's right-footed, but he's an exception because he's very two-footed. I like Malik Fofana, but with the news that Lyon are not getting relegated, he's actually no longer a very logical option because he's probably going to cost like 60 million now instead of 30, and we can't really afford to take that sort of a risk on a player. So I'd actually no longer suggest Malik Fofana as my number one option. Similarly, I don't really think I'd consider Bradley Barcola either because of the price. I think stylistically, he's the best fit. He has the playmaking ability, he has the one-on-one dribbling, and he has the speed. If you look at his statistics, very high non-penalty XG, so he's going to create a lot of chances, decent shot creating actions, he carries the ball very well, has a lot of successful take-ons, very good player, wins aerials, receives a lot of progressive passes. You could see how it would work with the box midfield, especially with Wirtz being more inside. He'd probably be able to find someone like Barcola in space. Sabo would be able to switch to him. Ibu could switch to him. It'd be a very good fit. In fact, it would be the best fit because Barcola could even do the PSG role of playing like a striker, similar to how I would want Morgan Rogers to play if we were trying to emulate PSG. And he's a PSG player, but not really that sensible. A great option would be Rodrigo, but there are a couple of caveats with him. Rodrigo is not the type of player who you really want hugging the touchline. If you look at a lot of his statistics, they're kind of warped because of the fact that he had to play on the right. So let's more so talk about Rodrigo's play style. So if you were to put Rodrigo into this team, you're going to notice a couple of problems. So let's take Diaz out. Rodrigo isn't really going to want to be in this very wide position. He's also not incredibly fast. He's pretty good one-on-one, and he's a very good playmaker. And I told you, you're not going to find the perfect fit here. The one thing that Rodrigo really isn't is he's not particularly fast, right? So if you're in wide open space and you can sort of isolate him, maybe Kirkes is on the underlap, Rodrigo's not going to be able to be the guy who you can run into space. He could be the guy, though, where we saw the one clip of Diaz who kind of just sits here, receives the ball, and then dribbles in. But Rodrigo's the most lethal when he's central. Actually, if you look at how Rodrigo plays, I think he'd be much better as a second striker in a 4-4-2. So in this situation, you'd probably want Rodrigo more so in Wirtz's position than out wide, but he would still do great there. And he would do better than someone like Diaz there because he's a much better playmaker. But spending that amount of money on someone like Rodrigo might not be that sensible. Another option, who's I'd say the last player in sort of this elite tier, is Rafael Leao. Now, there are a lot of problems with Leao. He doesn't boast incredible statistics for shooting and XG, but he's incredible at winning one-on-one duels, and he's an elite athlete. You could even say that he's like an Mbappe level athlete, because when we want to talk about someone like Rafael Leao, he's going to run into space. You give him the ball, he could be here, and and he's getting to the ball by the time it's switched. He's going to rinse his fullback in a one-on-one. Is Liao that great of a passer? Not really. Is he probably the best one-on-one player that I'm going to suggest? 100%. And sometimes you have to take that as a caveat. He, much like Barcola, could also play as a striker and do the PSG style of play. Now, a lot of people might be like, Rafael Leao doesn't track back, Rafael Leao doesn't press. Well, we said the same thing about Ousmane Dembele, and Enrique transformed him into a workhorse. Leao is an even better athlete than Dembele. Like I said, he's an Mbappe level athlete. You could make him do that. Now, it's only, of course, you would only be able to do that if he buys into this and he actually learns how to press. There's a lot of ifs, which is why I don't think you would sanction a move for him, because he would still be expensive, probably cheaper than the likes of Barcola or Rodrigo, but still very expensive, and there's even more risk than those, because he could just fully not fit and not press and be a waste. So I do see the problems, and why I would probably suggest Rodrigo over him. I would just say that he's not necessarily a terrible option, and he's probably the only elite option left on the list of consideration. So another player people really like to talk about is Antonio Nusa. I like Antonio Nusa. I think he's a very good player. I've liked him since he was at Bruges. I've liked him at Leipzig. I've been a little bit more disappointed with him at Leipzig, but he's still very young. He has very good stats for XG. He has very good stats for expected assists. So you can tell that he's kind of a decent playmaker, a decent shot maker. He sort of has everything that we would want in this role, but he's just very raw still, right? He's going to take on people. He's going to win his one-on-ones. He's very fast. He'll pass into the box. He'll draw fouls. He'll win pens. He'll do what we need, right? Passes into the penalty area, 90th percentile. That's incredible. It's very good for a winger, especially in a very bad Leipzig team. But I just think he's about a year or two away from ready. So if we were to sign someone like him, he's not just going to click right away. He's going to take time to adapt. But of the next few options that I'm going to consider, which is like the tier right under elite, like we're looking at prospects or just like okay players who could maybe raise their ceiling, he's probably the best one. He would be the most sensible. I just wonder how expensive he would be from Leipzig. Another option we could consider is somebody like Kevin Schade. There are a couple of worries. Would a team like Brentford sell him? They're already going to sell Vissa, maybe, because I heard Tottenham are linked. Mbeumo's leaving to Man U. They lost Christian Norgard. Not a great situation over there. They obviously lost Thomas Frank and replaced him with a set-piece coach and Keith Andrews. It's not a great situation for them. They probably would want to keep someone like Schade, because otherwise their front line would be Igor Thiago and whoever else they choose to buy. But Schade is incredibly fast, and he's, from what I see, pretty good in one-on-ones. I think he's a pretty good dribbler. The statistics don't really show it, but I think he's a pretty good dribbler, and he creates a lot of XG. Issue, of course, is that he can't really pass the ball very well. He doesn't have an elite technical level, but I would take someone like Schade over Anthony Gordon, which might sound like a crazy take, but I think when you look at somebody like Anthony Gordon, you don't really see the same XG, you know? When you're looking at Schade, he's creating a lot of shots. Sure, Anthony Gordon seems to be a better all-around footballer. He carries the ball better. He's a better passer of the ball. He potentially draws more fouls than somebody like Schade. We also have seen Gordon win a lot of penalty kicks. He's been elite in transition, but he would be so much more expensive than somebody like Schade. And he would effectively play the same role, because Gordon's still not an elite passer. He's still not going to be an elite playmaker. He's still going to be so ineffective against low blocks in a similar way to Schade. So I don't really understand why Liverpool would even consider someone like Gordon. My only logic is he's a Scouser and he's homegrown. But the homegrown quota problems are a bit overblown, and just because he's a Scouser and he loves Liverpool, that doesn't mean he should play for the club. Gordon is a bit overrated, and I think he actually looks good because of the system Newcastle play. They're much more in transition. We're a team that's going to develop into more of a settled play team. And like I said before, pace is the least important trait in the winger. I just think he should still have it because we'll still have transitions. And we don't have any pace in our front line at the moment, right? Because Mo is slowing down. I wouldn't just go for someone like Gordon, who's a pace merchant, who's decent in one-on-ones, similar to Schade. I would look for someone who's generally fast, elite at playmaking, and elite in one-on-ones instead, which is why someone like Nusa would be better, Liao, Rodrigo, etc. A bit of a wild card option for this would be Asane Diao. I've watched him at Como and I've watched him at Betis. I really like him. I think he's a good player. I think he's fairly two-footed. I think he could play both on the left and the right. He's very physical. I like having a tall player in this position on the left wing because I think it maximizes Mo's crosses to the back post. He's another player who generates a lot of XG, another player who scores a decent amount of goals. He was great in that Como team, has learned a lot from Cesc Fabregas. Very fast, great technical level. He's a great carrier. He's good in one-on-ones. He's another person of the similar profile to someone like Gordon or Schade, but I do think his ceiling's a bit higher. The reason I say that is I think he'll actually develop more of a playmaking game than those two, because I've read some comments that I should be more specific in what I mean by potential. It's mainly that I think he can actually develop his all-around game, and I don't see players like Gordon or Schade doing that. So if Liverpool want to sign maybe a younger player who's potentially cheaper, again, Como just bought him from Betis, so he might be more expensive, Diao would be another good option. I would still go for Rodrigo, but again, it's about how expensive these players are. Now, tentatively, I'm just going to put Diaz here and talk about how we're going to play. I think the build-up is also important in this. And you're going to see why I don't really like this as an option and why I would go for either having no striker and playing someone like Rodgers up front or having an actual striker. So let's talk about build-up. Defensively, what we're going to see is, okay, let's say Ryan's here. We do the initial build-ups that I was talking about where one of the players drops in. This is already a bit of a struggle because Mo's ultimately going to come more centrally here when they're flying forward. And you're probably going to get something that looks more like this. Effectively, this is going to look like a diamond in order to cope defensively. I have a couple of problems with this. I don't like Verts being forced centrally, and where once we're in the final third and you get something like this, for example, and maybe you get Diaz here or it's the opposite. Let's just do an example of where it's the opposite. You get Verts here, Sabo kicks him out and get the ball here. Someone like Mo here or here. This feels a lot more awkward to me as a tactic. It just in general, I have a couple of problems with it. We have our pivot. It would have to stay pretty relatively connected. You get this and this. Maybe we get the scenario where Grab's here. Again, one of the players just ends up dropping, and what we've effectively done is moved Verts to the striker position. I just don't like him here. So for me, this doesn't really work as a build-up tactic for this, of Gravenberch dropping in. So instead, let's look at the other build-up scenario where we just have a bunch of these boxes going forward with Kirkes and Frimpong. It's glorified wingers. Here you get something like this, where these players come centrally with the freedom to like operate and kind of interchange. Like Verts could flip with Diaz and Szoboszlai could flip with Salah, or Salah could flip with Frimpong, Diaz could flip with Kirkes. I'm more amicable to this. Again, in this scenario, you maximize more out of Sabo with McAllister struggling. But a problem I have here again is it's so hard to find a player who can do this well. Mane would be the perfect profile for this, but of course there is no true Mane that we could get right now, right? Because Diaz isn't really suited for this. If I put Rodrigo here, he's good at this cut inside job, but this would relegate Kirkes to be pretty far wide. So that's a bit of a mismatch. Of course, Barcola would be perfect. I keep talking about it. I'm not even going to bring up Fofana. Liao could do this pretty well, and he could do the wide job, but of course with him it's the pressing. Schade could run this channel very well, but if you got some scenario like this where you needed Schade to make a pass to the back post, I don't think he can do it. Similarly, I think if you had Anthony Gordon here, he can't do it. Again, Gordon's only really good at passing when he's on the right. He's like a decent crosser of the ball with his right foot, but he's not good at these types of crosses. He's good at being on this side and doing these types of crosses, which we've seen him do to Isak. So again, the difficulty with this tactic is going to be finding the right profile of player. I actually wouldn't recommend Liverpool do this. I think it's an interesting idea, and I think if you can get someone like Barcola, I would go for it. Like, if you can't get Isak, Barcola's available, run this. I think it's a great idea. But the problem is that once you do it, you're essentially stuck with it, right? Because defensively, we're always going to have Salah, which means that if you were to sign a striker later, you drop Sabo, and then our defense is terrible. So I would be more inclined to go with a PSG style team, which is something I'll talk about in the future. Not now, maybe much more in the future, but how we can actually emulate PSG. But I would go for something like that instead. A little bit of a sneak peek to that would be, this would work much better if the player here was another 10, but like a physically robust 10. So like Kenan Yildiz or Morgan Rogers, because what it allows you to do is have any of these players interchange, like Verts here, Salbo here, with your 10. In fact, I could actually just bring in Morgan Rogers. With your 10, these guys could all interchange, and Salah just stays high. And you're just using Salah to score goals, and these guys are just constantly interchanging. And I'm just trying to convey why I don't think we should do the double false 9 with a left winger, and we should instead look to either sign an out-and-out number 9 or somebody like Rogers. But yeah, that's the end of the video. If you liked it, please subscribe, comment, like the video, and follow me on Twitter. Next up, I'm going to do a video on Giovanni von Bronckhorst, probably tomorrow or the day after, and I will be making a video on the Preston game, potentially before, but definitely after. And yeah, as always, thanks for watching.